1 second. So quite unusual this year. Usually Tazri and Metzora together, which is why I didn't know the laning very well this morning, because we don't do it very often. Okay, here we go. Come on. Wrong window. Right, here we go. Okay, can everyone see that? So,
Yep.
Today we're going to talk. Last week we talked about Loshan Hara.
Gone again.
Yeah, last week we talked about Loshan Hara, which is evil, wicked speech. This week we're going to speak about Loshan Tov, which is good speech. Here we go.
Last week's Parsha described the signs of the Metzora, commonly mistranslated as leper, a person afflicted by a spiritual malady which places him or her in a state of ritual impurity. This week's Torah reading begins by detailing how the recovered Metzora is purified by the Kohen priest with a special procedure involving 2 birds, spring water in an earthen vessel, a piece of cedar wood, a scarlet thread, and a bundle of hyssop. A home can also be afflicted with zarat by the appearance of dark red or green patches on its walls. In a process lasting as long as 19 days, a Kohen determines if the house can be purified or whether it must be demolished. Ritual impurity is also engendered through a seminal or other discharge in a man and menstruation or other discharge of blood in a woman, necessitating purification through immersion in a mikveh.
Thank you. Everyone remember why they have to bring 2 birds, by the way. It's all very symbolic.
2 birds.
2.
Yeah, because if you recall, the Metzora we say was caused by Loshan Hara, so bad speech. So they were wittering away like birds, twittering away and tweeting away in the old-fashioned sense. So the korban involves birds. Okay, so we're actually going to talk about speech today. We know this idea that sarat, which is the illness that Metzora comes from, was basically a public sort of, I suppose, miraculous exposure of the sin of Loshan Hara, that speaking badly about people caused a physical malaise. This whole idea is fascinating, that something verbal or something spiritual can cause a physical malaise. What we see from this is the power of words, and we spoke about this last week. So we always talk about Loshan Hara. There's always campaigns going on. There's a clean speech campaign now. Watch your, don't speak Loshan Hara, squash the losh, all this kind of stuff. Why don't we? So many other times we focus on the positive, right? The Torah, when it talks about unclean animals, says animals which are not clean rather than saying dirty. Why not simply talk about Loshan Tov, good speech, the opposite of Loshan Hara, bad speech? We don't actually find that phrase anywhere. It's mentioned briefly in the Midrash with regard to God, but Loshan Hara is generally with regard to human beings. So if it's such a terrible sin to speak badly, why not emphasize the mitzvah to speak positively? So Rabbi Sachs's teaching this week is that there is such a concept, and we're going to see a few examples of where it is. Now, the laws of Loshan Hara, by the way, we touched on this last week, are complex. There's no question that the power of words is immense, and the danger and the damage that can be done with words is huge. We touched on the social media aspect of that. There's another side to that as well, the cancellation of people. That's something you can be held to account for your words that you said 30 years ago and never forgiven, which is quite unforgiving as well. But let's have a look at what various places say in the teaching. So the first one we've got is Pirkei Avos, and we've looked at this before in a different context. This is the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his 5 disciples and how he used to praise them. Now, one way I think we learned about this previously was the idea of finding each student's individual qualities, because we find that he would find something to say about each of them. So let's have a look. Who would like to read? Any volunteers?
Okay, I will do it if you like.
Julian.
Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 preeminent disciples, namely Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Joshua ben Hananiah, Rabbi Yossi the priest, Rabbi Shimon ben Nathanael, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. He used to recount their praise. Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, a plastered well that never loses a drop. Joshua ben Hananiah, happy the one who gave him birth. Yossi the priest, a pious man. Shimon ben Natanel, a man who fears sin, and Elazar ben Arach, an ever-flowing spring. So this is all in Pirkei Avos, yeah?
Yes, yes. Which one is it?
Oh
Chapter
yeah, you
2.
got the source at the
Yeah,
top. Yeah.
yeah. So it's very nice. He found a suitable way, right? They have different qualities. One is like a spring, constantly giving out. One is a God-fearing man. Why he chose that over other things, not sure exactly, but different things. Okay, very nice, right?
Joshua about Hananiah, he doesn't say anything about him himself, only that the person who
There was
gave
a credit
his
to his,
mother must
yeah,
have
he
been
was,
happy.
that's right, it was a credit to his dear old mum. I mean, the rest of them probably were as well. Okay, I mean, it's an interesting discussion for another day as to what these different qualities were. But he found different qualities in each of them. So can you think of any problem with that? Isn't this a beautiful idea? The Rebbe is busy talking up and praising his students. Any downside?
What about the ones he didn't talk about?
What about the ones he left out?
Well, let's assume that these were his 5 and he found something nice to say about each of them. You know, when kids get prizes in school, they have what they call, what do they call it? Not a citation. I can't think what they call it. Maybe it's a citation. Like, what did you get the prize for? So sometimes they have to come up with something really obscure, like, you know, got a prize for being wide awake in class or something, because they can't think of anything else nice to say, you know. Let's have a look. There is a concern with being overly praiseworthy towards people, right? I mean, the one concern that's not mentioned is the old Ein Hara. Like, for example, a parent has a favorite child, right? Anyone following the Prince Andrew story?
Sort of.
Which bit?
So, in a completely tone-deaf piece of what to me only seems like a PR disaster, you had Prince Andrew, who's in disgrace from his recent settlement and escapade, who's lost a lot of his royal privileges, playing a prominent role in escorting the Queen during the service of the Duke of Edinburgh. People say, well, he's a favourite son, she can't say no to him. I don't know what's going on there, but it's not good for business. And, you know, out of sight, out of mind should mean out of sight, out of mind. It's saying, well, I'm just giving my mum a hand, you know, but she's not just your mum, she's the Queen, and it's all symbolic and it all has, you know, implications. So what made me just think of that? Oh, so like somebody else.
She was advised not to, but she insisted on having him. So
yes.
I read.
Yes, or he may have voiced himself upon her, because apparently she has a soft spot for him. But anyway, be that as it may, it was a bit tone deaf. But anyway, so let's say you had a favorite child and you're speaking about your favorite child. Oh, Andrew is such a good son to me. And then you get Charles saying, right? So it's easy sometimes to provoke. You have good intentions, right? You know, we've all, I don't know, one of the classic examples of Loshan Hara is to actually say something nice about someone unwittingly in front of somebody who doesn't like them. Right? So you say, oh, yes, that guy's such a mensch, you know, always putting himself out for other people. And somebody says, such a mensch, my foot. You don't know him like I do. You know, they should put him in jail and throw away the key, that guy. You know, he's so dishonest he would sell his own grandmother, you know, and you've provoked that by saying something nice. Yeah. Oh, what a sweet child. If you only knew. So you can never say anything about anyone according to that. So there is a section in the Talmud which says something like that. Rav Dimi said, let's have a look. Who wants to read? Nice and short.
Yeah. Rab Dimi, brother of Rab Safra, said, no one ever talk in praise of his neighbor, for praise will lead to criticism. Rashi.
Right. Okay. So what's the criticism? Anyone know the joke? I'm sure I've told you know the joke about the apprentice shadchan, right? The shadchan's busy, so he takes on an apprentice, and the apprentice says, "What do I have to do?" He says, "Just exaggerate everything, just talk everything up." So they go to see this guy and say, "Have I got a girl for your son? She's the most beautiful girl. You know, she's so stately." And the apprentice says, "Beautiful? She's a supermodel." And then he says, "And this girl, you know, she went to Oxford." The apprentice says, "Oxford? She went to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and Yale." And he thinks, you know, this is starting to sound a bit ridiculous. So the shadchan says, "There's just one problem. She has a tiny, tiny birthmark on the side of her nose. The says, "Tiny, it's like a golf ball." So there is a danger that when you start praising somebody, it's human nature to then start saying, well, but I don't want to overstate it. Yeah, he's a nice guy, but he has his faults. So this is what Rashi says. I'm sorry, I've only got the Hebrew. Rashi says, Bali de ra'asai. When you praise someone, you'll come to ra'ah to basically trash them, rubbish them. Why? He says, sheh, kashehu masaper b'tovato. When you speak of someone's praises, yoseh medai, more than but yoseh medai means more than enough, basically, too much. Who atmo, the person themselves who's saying it, omer, chutz mimidarazu. You'll start to think, I better qualify. You say, well, he's a nice guy, but he has a flaw. Shabo. Or alternatively, the problem is acherim shomim, others will hear shezem mishpacho, that you're praising him, but omer, and they'll say, oh no, he's not such a great guy. So basically, Rashi says two scenarios. One is that you yourself, when you're praising somebody, start to feel like you're going over the top, and it's natural to then dial back a bit and say, well, I don't want to overpraise him. Yeah, he's a nice guy, but he's a bit dodgy. Or others hearing will start to come out with things that they know. So basically, when you praise people, you have to be careful because it can trigger all kinds of things. This is what the Talmud says. That's Rashi. So Rashi's issue is you have to be careful because the words may themselves trigger negativity. Now, the Rambam, Maimonides, has a completely different take on this. He says, who would like to read number 3?
Whoever speaks well about his neighbour in the presence of his enemies is guilty of a secondary form of evil speech, Loshan Hara, since he will provoke them to speak badly about him.
Right. So for now, we don't know why Rabbi Yochanan and Metzora was okay to praise his students in public. But Rav Dimi had said in the name of Rav Safra that you shouldn't praise your neighbor because it leads to criticism. That's what the Talmud says. So Rashi says it's all about the content. That the content itself, once you start praising somebody, you feel like you have to maybe qualify it. Rambam says, no, it's not about the content. It's not about the speech. It's about the context. Who are you saying it to? If you say to somebody's friend, oh, so-and-so is such a mensch, they'll agree with you. If you say it in front of an enemy, it will become a pretext for them to start to speak Loshan Hara. So
it reminds me, Rabbi, of the biggest backhanded compliment I ever had.
yeah.
A certain friend of mine said to me, I was chairman of a charity group. He said, I don't care what they say. I think you're a good chairman.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the old one where the rabbi goes over to the chazan and says, the rabbi goes over to the chazan and says, I think Kol Nidre was beautiful. Don't listen to what all the others are saying. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes. Correct. Yes, backhanded compliments. Right. So there's a machlokes here. There's a debate. The Talmud says you shouldn't praise people too much because it can lead to negativity. Rashi says it's all about the nature of speech. That when you start praising somebody, it will lead to, so people feel like, oh, we have to, right, balance, or we have to balance it, right? Rambam says it all depends who's that. So a completely different approach. Right? One is about the content itself. The other is about the context, about who's actually there. So is this just opinions, or is this a very sort of, fundamental disagreement? Well, here's another passage which we've learned about before from Ketubot 17a. Who would like to read this?
I will.
You can sing it if you know the tune.
I'm not singing it.
Right. For those who don't know the tune, this is Keitzad Meragdim Lifnei Hakala. This is where it comes from this Talmud. Keitzad Meragdim Lifnei Hakala means how should you dance in front of the bride? Right, off you go.
Okay. Our rabbis taught, how should you dance before the bride? That is, what should one sing? The disciples of Hillel hold that at a wedding, you should sing that the bride is beautiful, whether she is or not. Shammai's disciples disagree. Whatever the occasion, don't tell a lie. Do you call that a lie? The Hillelites respond. In the eyes of the groom, at least, the bride is beautiful.
Right, this is famous. We've done this before, right? So the original Keitzad Meragdim is how should you dance before the bride? It's a mitzvah to go to a wedding, and the greatest rabbis would go and do somersaults and sort of, sort of show off at weddings and do all kinds of shtick. So what is the correct approach to take? Right? Practical question. Rabbi, what should I do? I've been invited to a wedding. The bride is hideous. Should I say, what a beautiful glowing bride? So this is a debate of Hillel and Shammai. So Hillel says, you go to a wedding, you say, obviously you have to do it in a modest way. You don't say, wow. You say, oh, what a beautiful bride. You know, it's, I've never heard a rabbi stand up under the chuppah and say, you know, the bride's looking beautiful today. But, you know, everyone else always says it. So, you know, right. So Hillel says, yeah, you say, what a beautiful bride. Shammai says, well, not if she's ugly. So as if she's ugly, you say, he goes on to say, you say, you know, she's a great homemaker. She's a great cook. You know, she's a very homely girl. You know, she's very Hamish. Yeah.
Rabbi, but usually, however a bride looks in normal life, actually on her wedding day, generally brides look beautiful, and as you say, they are beautiful to their
right.
to their groom.
Right. So
they're in a glow comes
right.
out.
I think it's very true. If you see people ever have like their wedding pictures and things, they often look nothing like it, right? So it's like we see these celebrities without any makeup, and they're unrecognizable. So yeah, correct. So first of all, so Hillel says you should say she's beautiful. Shammai says you can't say she's beautiful if she's not. Hillel says not a lie. To the groom, she's beautiful. So number one, right, she's glowing. And if she's not glowing to you, she's certainly glowing to the groom. And maybe she's not glowing to you. You're the one with the problem. So in any event, again, it's the same it's a slight variation of the same argument, right? The Talmud says you shouldn't criticize, you shouldn't praise people publicly because it may lead to criticism. Rashi says that's talking about the actual wording itself. And Rambam says, no, it's not about the wording, it's about the context. The same thing here. What should you say to a bride? Hillel says, you should say she's beautiful, whether you think she's beautiful or not. Why? Because Hillel saying it's not about the words, it's about how you use them, it's about the context. Shammai says you can't tell a lie, you have to call it out like it is. And Shammai is the one that's usually more strict and blunt. It's a bit like the same discussion. Is it about the words? Rashi says it's about the words. Rambam says it's about how you use them. Same thing here. Shammai says, no, it's about the words, whereas Hillel says it's not even about the words. It's about how you use the words, right? It's not just, it's interesting. And you know, you could say that Beis Shammai are being very cruel, but, you know, some people say, I'm just telling the truth. The truth is an important value. Just telling the truth. Don't understand why you got so upset. I was just, you know, my wife asked me something and I told her the truth and she got upset. So the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it traps you, quite literally. No, there's no malice here, right? Beis Shammai are not being cruel, right? They're being honest. They're saying, you know, how can you, let's say the bride is not conventionally beautiful. How can you say that? Say something else. Say she's going to make a wonderful wife and mother. She's so caring. She's so devoted. But he said, I'll say, no, you can say she's beautiful. If you want to be really technical, say, Mazel Tov on your beautiful bride. There you go. She's beautiful to you, right? So to Shammai or his disciples, it's about the words. To Hillel, it's not about the words. It's about how you use language. I suppose when we talk about being a little bit creative with language and maybe the odd white lie, that's perhaps the argument that comes to the fore. Is it about the words, in which case, yes, they have to be exact and accurate? Or is it about how they're used? We find this in other places as well, right? The Torah says, let us make man in the plural. There were people who took this to mean that there's a multiplicity, there's a Godhead, there's a Trinity. That's one of the proofs that the Christians used for the Trinity. Is God says, let us make man, God must be plural. So we say, number one, I think Rashi tells us that it shows the humility of the Almighty, that says he consulted with the celestial world. But the other thing you could say is that we know the Torah uses, colloquialisms. And the same way the Torah talks about the hand of God, it's not the physical hand of God. It's a way of understanding something. So even if you want to get really technical, you say the bride's beautiful, well, she's not exactly beautiful. Okay, but you're saying, you know, she's a glowing, fine, to say she's glowing. Every bride is glowing on her wedding day, one hopes. So it depends. Is speech just a means, I suppose the question would also be, is speech an end in itself? Or is it a means to an end? I like the people who correct your English, you know. So I can't stand bad grammar. It does annoy me, you know. So on the one hand, it's important to correct it. On the other hand, there's a time and a place. If someone's giving a very emotional hesped and eulogy, and they accidentally, you know, say something that's grammatically incorrect, I don't think you have to correct them, right? We can live with that, yes? I'll give you an interesting,
Rabbi?
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I thought in Judaism we don't really, comment on people's appearances and things like that. And also the word beautiful, can it be in context of like, we're all like God's children, like he's all around us and part of us. So we're all beautiful in a way, like whether it's physically or because
spiritually,
we've got good hearts or whatever.
Qualities.
Yeah, spiritually, like beautiful can mean more than just appearance as well.
I don't recommend it, but if you open, the National Enquirer is not around anymore, but even OK Magazine or Hello Magazine, it's full of picture perfect celebrities who by the looks of it are terrible people to be in relationships with. They might look beautiful on the outside, but they're horrible people. They're awful. Look at the Oscars this week. Saw a funny comment, by the way. I don't know if anyone saw this. Somebody says, what does the Torah say about this whole business with the Oscars and the slapping? And says, well, everyone knows you have to talk to the rock and not hit it. So anyway, in fact, it's well known that people who are strikingly beautiful, particularly women, often people find it intimidating. Men find it intimidating, right? They'll get lots of one-night stands, but they won't get lasting, meaningful relationships. Yeah. So absolutely 100%. There's another Talmud somewhere where there was a certain person who was extremely ugly, and I think it was Rabbi Yochanan, actually, I don't remember, who said, which is a horrible thing to say, but he said, gosh, you look strange, don't you? And the person said, go talk to my creator, right? So absolutely. And beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is very subjective. And thankfully, you don't all find beauty to be the same thing. If we did, we'd all be fighting over the same, people, right? We don't. Right? Everyone is going to find somebody else beautiful. I saw a picture of a couple. I don't know if anyone saw this on Facebook. I didn't know them, but somebody had shared. And they said, today's our anniversary. We both have Down syndrome. Bet no one shares this. It was a beautiful picture. I shared it. I thought it was a beautiful picture. Why not? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's subjective. So, look, the Talmud's there to teach us things. So maybe it's not about Shammai really thinking that you should call someone ugly, but it's actually a great opportunity to have this discussion where Hillel then brings out this idea. By the way, it's not Hillel, it's the students of Hillel, the students of Shammai, that everyone is beautiful in someone else's eyes. Beauty is subjective. But it's also a machlokes, an argument, a bit like the one with the Rambam and the Rashi, right? So Rashi with the praise was saying, is it true or is it excessive? Rambam was saying that's not the issue. The issue is, what's the context? Is it amongst enemies or friends? Will it create warmth or will it create envy and resentment? It's a completely different view of things. Interesting, right? Is it the words themselves that are so important, or is it the context? And just, by the way, interesting halacha. It's not entirely clear that you have to be so particular to correct someone's laying. Okay, it's not even clear from the Megillah, actually. I saw in halacha. Yes, we should try to lay in accurately. There are certain things, like the section of Zachor is very important. That has to be read correctly. But there's other things where, so for example, if a bar mitzvah boy is laying, he makes a mistake. It's not so clear that you have to embarrass him and, make him self-conscious by correcting him. It's not so clear. It's not so clear. Yeah.
But like when you're laning, I thought I was of the understanding that you would prefer that so that
so I like to be corrected. Yes, I like to be corrected, and people that lane regularly definitely should know better, should be corrected if they get it wrong. So 100%. Normally have people standing either side pre-COVID. But it's all about context. So bar mitzvah boy is usually very nervous.
Yes,
it's his first time. Yeah. So somebody might say, you have to correct him, made a mistake. I'm not convinced. So look, Eli Solomon made a mistake. I don't remember what it was, but I remember thinking, I'm not going to correct him. Doesn't matter. Last Shabbat when he read very nicely, made one mistake or two mistakes maybe. I thought, want to encourage him. It's not so clear. So maybe that's also a manifestation of the same idea. Is it about the words or the context? We often say, people say it's the thought that counts. No, in Judaism we have very clear laws of how to do things and rules and protocols. It's not just the thought that counts, but the thought is relevant. The context, everything is context sensitive. According to Rambam, according to Rashi, it's the words that matter. It's interesting. It's a completely different way of looking at it. Now, coming back to this question, and why should we say nice things about people? Where in the Torah does it say you should praise people? What mitzvah do you think it comes under?
It's nice to say something nice to somebody.
Why?
That makes you feel nice and makes them feel
Okay.
nice.
Okay. What? I mean, I don't disagree with you. I'm just wondering. There's no mitzvah of Loshan Hara, by the way. It's various other mitzvot about not doing certain things. But where do you think we might tie in a much more basic principle of Judaism that might cover using words positively?
So go and buy it.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
How do you know it?
The golden rule of every religion.
Peace in the family.
Treat
Love your
others the way
neighbour
you would
as
treat.
yourself.
have them
Right.
treat
Love
you.
your neighbor. Right. Love your neighbor like yourself. So part of loving your neighbor is making them feel good. Let's have a look. Right. So this is the original. Right. Who'd like to read from Leviticus Vayikra 19?
I'll read it.
Off you go.
You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow as yourself. I
Right.
am Lord.
Love your neighbor like yourself. What does Rashi say? Who'd like to read Rashi on that?
Love your neighbor as yourself. Do not do to your neighbor which you would not wish him to do to you.
Right. So Rashi says that it's basically, he doesn't say you have to say nice things to him. He just says that you should treat him the way you want to be treated. What does Rambam say, interestingly? Let's have a look. Who'd like to read? Who hasn't read yet? Anyone?
I've not read.
Go on.
Each man is commanded to love each and every one of Israel as himself, as it states, love your neighbor as yourself. Therefore, one should speak the praises of others and show concern for their money, just as he is concerned with his own money and seeks his own honor. Whoever gains honor through the degradation of a colleague does not have a share in the world to come.
Okay. So Rashi simply says, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. That's almost reactive. Rambam says you have to be more proactive. He says, yes, loving your neighbor means talk them up, make them feel good, show concern for their property and their money. And if you degrade them, you lose your share in the world to come. That's pretty heavy. That's the Loshan Hara, by the way. If you gain honor to putting another person down, then you lose your share in the world to come. It's not worth it, basically. So again, we've got this split. It's interesting. It's Rashi and Rambam again. Rashi is a bit more kind of, I'll say literal or sort of direct, and Rambam is a bit more philosophical. So we had it previously where Rashi said it's all about you shouldn't praise people because it may lead to excesses, and Rambam said you shouldn't praise people if it's in front of others that may lead to criticism. Right? We have the same thing with what does loving your neighbor mean, like yourself? So we're saying here that according to Rambam, it's more than just how you act towards them, it's actually being proactively kind to them and saying nice things. Right? We had it with the bride and groom. We have Hillel and Shammai. So again, Hillel's a bit like the Rambam. Hillel says that you have to use your words proactively, and it's all about context. And Shammai says, no, you have to, your words themselves are the end rather than the means. And you have to tell the truth, and you have to use the right words and whatever. So I suppose it's the difference between the end and the means to the end, perhaps. Here it's the difference between reactive and proactive. So Rashi just says you have to be reactive. So don't do something to others if you don't want them to do it to you. So how you deal with others, how they'll deal with you. Rambam says you have to go further than that. Be proactive, and you have to say nice things about people. That's part of the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael, is to make people feel good. So now let's come back to the question about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We're told that he had 5 students and used to say all these things to them. Clearly, he believed in the power of words being proactive, like Hillel, like Rambam, right? He didn't mince his words. He said kind things to his students. I presume the context would have been that this is a Rebbe talking to a student. So you're not expecting any kind of pushback or any negativity from that. But let's have a look. There's another mission. The very first mission, Avos says, I'll read this. It says, the men of the great assembly said three things: be patient in judgment, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. So what does it mean to raise disciples? It means quite literally to build them up. Sorry?
To teach them.
To teach them, to nurture them, and arguably to build them up, quite literally to stand them up, right? Stand them on their, often we translate this as teaching them to stand on their own 2 feet. The Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, stand them up, right? Raise them, build them up, right? Don't put them down, build them up. How do you inspire them? You praise them, you build them up. How did he do that? He found their individual strengths. He didn't flatter them. He gave them credit for what they had. So, for example, let's go through them. Let's go back to the Mishnah and look at what some of them were. Right? He was very clever in his praise of them. And he didn't say, sometimes someone gets some, oh, you're the best athlete in your class. And the kid says, come on, Mum, don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows I'm the slowest. Oh, but to me, you're the best runner. That's just silly. Don't praise kids saying that, oh, you sing so beautifully. No, I don't. I'm tone deaf. I know I am. Don't lie to me. So, let's look at these. Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, what did he say? He's like a plastered well that never loses a drop. So what was his skill? His skill was his retentive memory, right? He remembered things. He had a remarkable memory. He wasn't creative. He had a remarkable memory. Now, before the oral Torah was written down, you needed people with good memories. What about Elazar ben Arach, the last one? He's an ever-flowing spring. What's a spring? He's creative, right? A spring needs to be fed by mountain water. Very interesting, if you look in his history, years later he got separated from his colleagues. He actually forgot his learning because he didn't have retentive memory, right? He was a creative person, creative juices. So what's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai doing? He's doing what Hillel did, using language creatively, right? The bride is beautiful to you, right? This is your quality, right? Your quality is not that you're a spring that's constantly flowing. Your quality is you're like a well that never loses a drop. But another student, your quality is you might lose drops, but you're constantly flowing. You're constantly coming out with creative things, right? Find a way to praise somebody. You're not abusing the speech. You're not twisting it. You're using it honestly. It's important to be honest, but at the same time, you can have Loshan Tov. You can have positive speech. Doesn't mean making up bubba mices about people, telling them, you're the best when they're clearly not. He found their qualities that he could emphasize. Right? He used the speech to motivate. That's Loshan Tov. Loshan Hara demotivates and diminishes. Loshan Tov, good speech, lifts people up. When one is focused and targets one's praise, one believes in humanity and people's potential. That makes a great teacher. So the crucial point is he wasn't exaggerating. So going back to the problem we had where we said, if you start praising people, it gets out of hand, because Rashi said what happens is either you start saying, oh, you're brilliant, except actually you're not so brilliant, you have flaws, or you say you're brilliant, everyone else says, no, he's not. Or according to the Rambam, the problem is you do it in front of people's enemies and then they criticize. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't do that. Presumably, number one, he wasn't speaking in front of their enemies. He was speaking to his students who presumably were all friends. And number two, he's very measured in what he says. What he says is very carefully worded, and it's very cleverly chosen to be appropriate praise of that student. So that is okay. Not only is that okay, but according to many, that's how you show your Ahavat Yisrael. Now, obviously, you have to be careful about the context of what you say and when, but how can we not praise people? How can we not use speech positively? When the Talmud tells us not to praise people excessively in front of their enemies, that's one thing. But to not praise people at all in front of their friends would be a terrible thing. And we see that from this Mishnah. Yes, Pam.
Well, when one's teaching or when one's bringing up children or in your position or any position, you can say things. You don't have to go over the top, but
Right.
You might say to a child, I really like the way you answered the question today. And you're not
Right.
saying that the most brilliant child in the world,
Right.
but
100%.
you can make that child or adult feel, oh, wow, they're pleased with me and I've done something right. It doesn't mean to say that they've done everything right, but all those little things build up and they're important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not. It's coming back to the bridal discussion. The crucial point is it's not about lying or exaggerating. It's just about being creative with your words. So when Hillel said you praise the bride for her beauty, right? You're not lying. So if a teacher, if you outright say to a kid, you're brilliant at maths, and they're clearly not, that's silly, right? You say to a kid, your work is excellent and flawless when it's not. But you can say, I admire your effort. You say, I see that it's, I know you find this subject hard. I admire your effort and your resilience, and credit where credit's due. When I was in school, they used to have prizes for excellent, effort, and improvement for each year. They would give like 3 prizes. So excellence, you had to be excellent. Not everyone can be excellent. That's kind of, A double star, whatever it is nowadays, A triple star. I don't even know, right? But effort, you can get low grades, but put in the effort.
Yeah.
So that an improvement, anyone can improve, unless you're excellent. So I think that's quite a sensible system. Don't tell all the kids 10 out of 10 when it's not. Don't say, we don't want kids to feel bad, so we're going to give every kid 100%. That's just stupid. But recognize effort and improvement as well. I often think that's a flaw with a lot of competitions and things, that a child who's put in a huge effort relative to their ability often doesn't get acknowledged. And in sporting competitions, it's always the fastest. I like the kind of man of the match idea that you get an acknowledgement for basically being a mensch, or for effort, even if you're not the star. I think that's very nice. Actually, it comes back to the Oscar discussion. What should someone who has poor character traits be getting an Oscar? That's an interesting question itself. At the end of the day, they're getting it for their acting. They're not getting it for their personal qualities. But it is debatable. That's a whole.
They're also role models, aren't they? People in the public eye.
Right. I mean, that's a whole debate in itself. Of course, speech has been in the news this week. I think I shared an article from Rabbi Kalmanson all about it. Of course, speech has been in the news, as has violence, because this Oscars business. If anyone missed it, you must be living quite literally under a rock. I don't really watch TV, and I've already been told about it by about 300 different people on social media. And it throws up interesting questions, both in terms of Loshan Hara and use of language, and in terms of use of violence. When people say things like, I can understand why somebody felt somebody else needed a good slap, that might be true in the heat of the moment, but it's a very dangerous, slippery slope, because once we justify assault, then where does it end? On the other hand, it was provoked. We should recognize that. It's horrible. We've just been learning about Loshan Hara, how it kills people. It's horrible to make comments about people's medical conditions. It's not funny at all. I mean, I think the saddest part of all of it is most of these comedians are not actually that funny. They get paid huge sums to present things, and they're terrible. But there you go. So yes, it's been in the news this week. Always have to look at the context.
But Rabbi, comedians always said that they, that's what they do, alternative comic.
I know.
Say nasty things about people. Well, that's what we do. But
they like being, but you don't have to. You don't have to be offensive. Did we get to the last source? 1 second. I think I may have missed the last source. It's possible to be funny without being offensive. Some comedians are actually quite good at that. Yeah. We're finished. Right. Arguably, it's a measure of someone's lack of comedic ability that they have to resort to, just being offensive, basically, to shock. Is that really funny? Just somebody who gets up and says the most, swear words they can think of, and says, some risque comment and thinks it's funny. A lot of comedians do that. Still, is that all you can do? The only way you can be funny is to make jokes about inappropriate things. That's very sad, actually.
Yes. How many times have we switched a film off because there's just so much swearing? It could be a good film, and I just don't understand why they have to say these things, over and over again. It's not in context.
Yeah, absolutely. So there we go. We're done. Finished early. So yes, I think
get on with some cleaning.
The truth is that these things like the Clean Speech campaign, they're not about Loshan Hara. They're about using speech positively. So it is about the opposite of Loshan Hara, I would say. So I'm all for that. We should encourage positive speech as well as focusing, like anything. If Shabbos for you is not doing this and not doing that, you're never going to enjoy Shabbos. Shabbos should be out resting and spending time with the family and being liberated from your devices. And that means that you can't do certain things. Right? So Loshan Hara should be, what does Judaism say about speech? You can't gossip, you can't slander. What does Judaism say about speech? You should use your words very carefully. And that means that you should not, therefore, do ... There's always a positive and a negative side. We get caught up with the negative often. So yes, positive speech is a good thing. Right.